Hey, welcome back. Nick here. We just concluded chapter 12. What a climactic chapter from the great author Naomi Novick, and a real good, epic sort of conclusion to the main part of His Majesty's Dragon, book one of her Temeraire series. Did you love that? Was that not, full-scale aerial combat between at least 60 dragons? Napoleon Bonaparte tries to invade England by air in an alternate history retelling, daring aerial combat, dragons, crews boarding dragons and stuff by jumping through the air, swashbuckling fights on dragon back, bombs being dropped, all sorts of crazy stuff, right? So here we are. Let's close it out, though, because we have to kind of see how the author is going to take us out and take us into the next chapter of this epic series here. So let's begin with the epilogue. "Lawrence, be a good fellow and bring me a glass of wine," Jane Rowland said, all but falling into the chair beside his, without the slightest care for the ruin she was making of her skirts. "2 sets is more than enough dancing for me. I'm not getting up from this table until I have to leave." "Should you prefer to go at once?" he asked, rising. "I am happy to take you." "If you mean I'm so ungainly in a dress that you think I cannot walk a quarter of a mile over even ground without falling down, you may say so. And then I will knock you on the head with this charming reticule," she said with her deep laugh. "I have not got myself up in this fashion to waste it by running away so soon. Excidium and I will be back in Dover in a week, and then Lord knows how long it will be before I have another chance to see a ball, much less one supposedly in our honor. I will fetch and carry with you, Lawrence. If they're not going to feed us anything more than these French tidbits, I'm going to get more of them," Chenery said, getting up from his chair as well. "Here, here," Berkeley said. "Bring the platter." They were parted at the tables by the crush of the crowd, which was growing extreme as the hour drew on. London society was still nearly delirious with joy over the joint victories at Trafalgar and Dover, and temporarily as happy to enthuse over the aviators as it had been to disdain them before. So Dover, we know, was the aerial battle that we just heard about. That's like a new famous battle historically now in this sort of telling. Trafalgar was always a famous English victory, a British victory, you might say, naval victory over the combined French and Spanish fleets. That still happens in this story, but dragons are involved, and there's a separate battle where a separate invasion is repulsed from Dover. His coat and bars won him enough smiles and gestures of precedence that Lawrence managed to acquire the glass of wine without great difficulty. Reluctantly, he gave up the notion of taking a cigar for himself. It would have been the height of rudeness to indulge while Jane and Harcourt could not. It's not that they weren't into cigars or anything like that. I think, again, they're back out in the public society. So the fictitious aerial corps, which allowed women to be captains and officers, give women just a far more equal footing to men, they have to kind of hide that a little bit because still, and I love this, that the author is somewhat acknowledging that aside from dragons and some of the intricacies and the idiosyncrasies, rather, of the aerial corps, society still remains the same. And they have to kind of adjust to the historical norms of society there. He took a second glass instead. He imagined someone at the table would care for it. Both his hands thus occupied, he was happily not forced to do more than bow slightly when he was addressed on his way back to the table. "Captain Lawrence," Miss Montague said, smiling with a great deal more friendliness than she had shown in his parents' house. She looked disappointed to not be able to give him her hand. "How splendid it is to see you again. It has been ages since we were all together at Wollerton Hall. How is dear Temeraire? My heart was in my throat when I heard of the news. I was sure you should be in the thick of the battle, and so of course it was." "He is very well, thank you," Lawrence said, said as politely as he could manage. Dear Temeraire rankled extremely. Because remember, Lawrence was not well received by his parents and the dinner guests that they had when he unexpectedly showed up back at his family home on his way north to the Covent up north. He was not going to be openly rude to a woman he had met at one of his parents' guests, even if his father had not yet been softened by society's new approbation. There was no sense in aggravating the quarrel, and perhaps needlessly making his mother's situation more difficult. "May I present you to Lord Winsdale?" she said, turning to her companion. "This is Captain Lawrence, Lord Allendale's son, you know," she added in an undertone that Lawrence could barely hear. "Certainly, certainly," Winsdale said, offering a very slight nod, what he appeared to think a piece of great condescension. "Quite the man of the hour, Lawrence. You are to be highly commended. We must all count ourselves fortunate that you were able to acquire the animal for England." "You are too kind to say so, Winsdale," Lawrence said, deliberately forward to the same degree. "You must excuse me. This wine will grow too warm shortly." Miss Montague could hardly miss the shortness of the tone now. She looked angry for a moment, then said, with great sweetness, "Of course. Perhaps you are going to see Miss Galman, and I can bear her my greetings? Oh, how absurd of me! I must say, Mrs. Woolvey now, and she's not in town any longer, is she?" He regarded her with dislike. He wondered at the combination of perception and spite that enabled her to ferret out the former connection between himself and Edith. "No, I believe she and her husband are presently touring the Lake Country," he said, and bowed himself away, deeply grateful that she had not had the opportunity of surprising him with the news. So he obviously had heard. His mother had given him intelligence of the match in a letter sent only shortly after the battle, and reaching him still at Dover. She had written, after conveying the news of the engagement, I hope what I write does not give you too much pain. I know you have long admired her, and indeed I have always considered her charming, although I cannot think highly of her judgment in this matter." The true blow had fallen long before the letter came. News of Edith's marriage to another man could not be unexpected, and he had been able to reassure his mother with perfect sincerity. Indeed, he could not fault Edith's judgment. In retrospect, he saw how very disastrous the match would have been, on both sides, from him and Edith. He would not have spared her so much as a thought for the last 9 months or more. There was no reason Woolvey should not make Edith a perfectly good husband. He himself certainly could not have, and he thought that he would truly be able to wish her happy if he saw her again. But he was still irritated by Miss Montague's insinuations, and his face had evidently set into somewhat forbidding lines. As he came back to the table, Jane took the glasses from him and said, "You were long enough about it. Was someone pestering you? Do not pay them any mind. Take a turn outside, and see how Temeraire is enjoying himself. That will put you in a better frame of mind." The notion appealed immediately. "I think I will, if you will pardon me," he said, with a bow to the company. "Look in on Maximus for me. See if he wants any more dinner," Berkeley called after him. "Aunt Lily," Harcourt said, then looked guiltily about to see if any of the guests at the nearby table had overheard. Naturally, the company did not realize that the women with the aviators were themselves captains, and assumed them rather wives, though Jane's scarred face had earned several startled looks, which she ignored with perfect ease. Lawrence left the table to their noisy and spirited discussion, making his way outdoors. The ancient covert near London had long ago been encroached upon by the city and given up by the corps, save for use by couriers. But for the occasion it had been briefly reclaimed, and a great pavilion established at the northern edge where the headquarters had once stood. By the aviators' request, the musicians had been set at the very edge of the pavilion, where the dragons could gather around outside to listen. The musicians had been at first somewhat distressed by the notion, and inclined to edge their chairs away. But as the evening wore on, and the dragons proved a more appreciative audience than the noisy crowd of society, their fear was gradually overcome by their vanity. That's so great. I love that. Like all the people are ignoring the musicians after a while because they're just partying and drinking, and then the musicians are finally like, "Oh, nobody's paying attention. Oh, these dragons are pretty big fans. Let's lean in." Yeah. At least the dragons appreciate what we're doing. Lawrence came out to find the first violinist having abandoned the orchestra entirely and playing snatches of various airs in a rather didactic manner for the dragons, demonstrating the work of different composers. Maximus and Lily were among the interested group, listening with fascination and asking a great many questions. Lawrence saw after a moment, with some surprise, that Temeraire was instead curled up in a small clearing beyond the others, off to the side, and talking with a gentleman whose face Lawrence could not see. He skirted the group and approached, calling Temeraire's name softly. The man turned, hearing him. With a start of pleasant surprise, Lawrence recognized Sir Edward Howe and hurried forward to greet him. I'm very happy indeed to see you, sir, Lawrence. I'm very happy indeed to see you, sir, Lawrence said, shaking his hand. I had not heard that you were back in London, although I had made a point of inquiring after you when we first arrived. I was in Ireland when the news reached me. I've only just come to London, Sir Edward said, and Lawrence only then noticed that he was still in travelling clothes, and his boots were dust-stained. I hope you will forgive me. I presumed on our acquaintance to come despite the lack of formal invitation, in hopes of speaking with you at once. When I saw the crowd inside, I thought it best to come and stay with Temeraire until you appeared, rather than to try to seek you within. Indeed, I'm in your debt for putting yourself through so much trouble, Lawrence said. I confess I've been very anxious to speak with you ever since discovering Temeraire's ability, which I expect is the news which has brought you. All he can tell us is that the sensation is the same as that of roaring. We cannot account for how a mere sound might produce so extraordinary an effect, and none of us have ever heard of anything like. No, you would not have, Sir Edward said. Lawrence... He stopped and glanced at the crowd of dragons between them and the pavilion, all now rumbling in approval at the close of the first performance. Might we speak somewhere in more privacy? We can always go to my own clearing, if you would like, to be somewhere quieter. We can always go to my own clearing, if you would like to be somewhere quieter, Temeraire said. I am happy to carry you both, and it will not take me a moment to fly there. Perhaps that would be best, if you have no objection, Sir Edward asked Lawrence, and Temeraire brought them over carefully in his foreclaws, setting them down in the deserted clearing before settling himself comfortably. I must beg your pardon for putting you to such trouble and interrupting your evening, Sir Edward said. Sir, I assure you I am very happy to have it interrupted in this case, Lawrence said. Pray, have no concern on that score. He was impatient to learn what Sir Edward might know. A concern over Temeraire's safety from some possible agent of Napoleon's lingered with him, perhaps even increased by the victory. I will keep you in suspense no longer, Sir Edward said, although I do not in the least pretend to understand the mechanical principles by which Temeraire's ability operates. The effects are described in literature, and so I may identify it for you. The Chinese, and the Japanese, for that matter, call it by the name divine wind. This tells you a little beyond what you already know from example. I am afraid, but the true importance lies in this. It is an ability unique to one breed and one breed alone, the Celestial. The name hung in silence for long moments. Lawrence did not immediately know what to think. Temeraire looked between them uncertainly. Is that very different from an imperial? He asked. Are they not both Chinese breeds? Very different indeed, Sir Lawrence answered him. Imperial dragons are rare enough, but the Celestials are given only to the emperors themselves, or their nearest kin. I should be surprised if there were more than a few score in all the world. The emperors themselves, Lawrence repeated, in wonder and slowly growing comprehension. You will not have heard this, sir, but we took a French spy at the Coverton Dover shortly before the battle. He revealed to us that Temeraire's egg was meant not merely for France, but for Bonaparte himself. Sir Edward nodded. I'm not surprised to hear as much. The Senate voted Bonaparte the crown in May before last. The time of your encounter with the French vessel suggests the Chinese gave him the egg as soon as they learned. I cannot imagine why they should have made him such a gift. They have given no other signs of allying themselves with France, but the timing is too exact for any other explanation. And if they had some notion of when to expect the hatching, that might well explain the mode of transport as well, Lawrence finished for him. 7 months from China to France, around Cape Horn. The French could hardly have hoped to manage it except with a fast frigate, regardless of the risk. Lawrence, Sir Edward said with pronounced unhappiness, I must heartily beg your forgiveness for having so misled you. I cannot even plead the excuse of ignorance. I have read descriptions of celestials and seen many drawings of them. It simply never occurred to me that the ruff and the tendrils might not develop save with maturity. In body and wing shape, they're identical to the Imperials. I beg you not to refine upon it, sir. No forgiveness is called upon for the least, Lawrence said. It should scarcely have made the difference much to his training, and in the event, we've learned of his ability in very good time. He smiled up at Temeraire and stroked the sleek foreleg beside him, while Temeraire snorted in happy agreement. So, my dear, you are a celestial. I should not be surprised at all. No wonder Bonaparte was in such a taking to lose you. I imagine he will continue angry, Sir Edward said, and what is worse, we may have the Chinese on our necks over it. When they learn, they are prickly to an extreme where the Emperor's standing may be said to be concerned, and I do not doubt they will be annoyed to see a British serving officer in possession of their treasure. I do not see how it concerns either Napoleon or them in the least, Temeraire said, bristling. I am no longer in the shell. I do not care if Lawrence is not an emperor. We defeated Napoleon in battle and made him fly away, even though he is one. I cannot see that there is anything particularly nice about the title. Never fret, my dear. They have no grounds on which to make objection, Lawrence said. We did not take you from a Chinese vessel, arguably a neutral, but from a French man of war. They chose to hand your egg to our enemy, and you are wholly lawful prize. I'm glad to hear it, Sir Edward said, though he looked doubtful. They may still choose to be quarrelsome about it. Their regard for the laws of other nations is very small, and vanishes entirely when it conflicts with their own notions of proper behavior. Pray, have you any notion of how they stand with respect to us? They could make a pretty loud noise, I suppose, Lawrence said uncertainly. I know they have no navy to speak of, but one hears a great deal of their dragons. I will bring the news to Admiral Lenton, though, and I am sure he will know better than I do how to meet any possible difference of opinion with them over the matter. A rushing sound of wings came overhead, and the ground shook with impact. Maximus had come flying back to his own clearing, only a short distance away. Lawrence could see his red-gold hide visible through the trees. Several smaller dragons flew past overhead also, going back to their own resting places. The ball was evidently breaking up, and Lawrence realized from the low-burning lanterns that the hour had grown late. You must be tired from your journey, he said, turning back to Sir Edward. I am once again deeply obliged to you, sir, for bringing me this intelligence. May I ask you, as a further favor, to join me for dinner tomorrow? I do not wish to keep you standing about in this cold, but I confess I have a great many questions on the subject I should like to put to you, and I would be happy to learn anything more you know of celestials. It will be my pleasure, Sir Edward said, and bowed to both of them. No, I thank you. I can find my own way out, he said, when Lawrence would have accompanied him. I grew up in London, and I would often come wandering about here as a boy, dreaming of dragons. I dare say I know the place better than you do, if you have only been here a few days. He bade them farewell, having arranged the appointment. Lawrence had meant to stay the night at a nearby hotel where Captain Rowland had taken a room, but he found he was disinclined to leave Temeraire. Instead, he searched out some old blankets in the stable being used. So I just want to point that out, too. There's a bit of a relationship between Captain Rowland and Lawrence. He knows that Captain Rowland, she may have gotten a room in the hotel and stuff like that, but such is the relationship and the between captains and their dragons, and the understanding between captains about that relationship, that he's not thinking twice here about not showing up to that room with Roland for the night because his love for Temeraire, his partnership with Temeraire and stuff like that takes precedence over that. And he knows that Roland would understand that. I just think that's cool. Like a little subtle thing that I don't think would be the case with any other relationship besides the one that the authors created between dragons and their riders, their captains. Taking a room, he was disinclined to leave Temeraire, searched out some old blankets in the stable being used by the ground crew, and made himself a somewhat dusty nest in Temeraire's arms, his coat rolled up to the sleeve as a pillow. He would make his apologies in the morning. Jane would understand. "Lawrence, what is China like?" Temeraire asked idly, after they had settled down together, his wings sheltering them from the wintry air. "I've never been, my dear, only to India," he said. "But I understand it is very splendid. It is the oldest nation in the world, you know. It even predates Rome. And certainly their dragons are the finest in the world," he added, and saw Temeraire preen with satisfaction. "Well, perhaps we may visit when the war is over and we have won. I would like to meet another Celestial some day," Temeraire said. "But as for their sending me to Napoleon, that is great nonsense. I am never going to let anyone take you from me." "Nor I, my dear," Lawrence said, smiling, despite all the complications which he knew might arise if China did object. In his heart he shared the simplicity of Temeraire's view of the matter, and he fell asleep almost at once in the security of the slow, deep rushing of Temeraire's heartbeat, so very much like the endless sound of the sea. That concludes the epilogue, and now we still have another section here. Why not? You're still listening. Let's go to the end. Final section here. Let's get through it. From the sketchbook of Sir Edward Howe. And I want to make a appeal here as well, if you haven't already, to please support the author. I'm reading this and putting this on YouTube on faith that I'm not going to be violating copyright or something like that. Who knows? Perhaps I am, but I would just want to encourage everybody, buy the book if you haven't already. Purchase the audiobook, support the publisher, support the author always, trying to add my own unique spin on this to create some sort of unique telling that hopefully will be accepted as such and valued as such. But let's always remember to support the author here as we come to the end. From the sketchbook, this last section is like, Sir Edward Howe's the dragon expert. We just heard from his notes on the dragons. So from the sketchbook of Sir Edward Howe, let's take a look here. And this is another reason why it'd be great to get a paperback copy or perhaps a digital copy if it includes this of the book, because you get to see these really cool original renderings. There's a lot of fan fiction online of what other people think, wikis and stuff of what people think these dragons look like. This is what they have sketched it as. Regal Copper, the biggest one, that was Maximus. Celestial Temeraire, Longwing, that's Lily. Pascal's Blue, there. Oh, Yellow Reaper and crew here. Selected extracts from observations on the Order Draconia in Europe with notes on the Oriental breeds by Sir Edward Howe, FRS. London, John Murray, Albemarle Street, 1796. Prefatory note from the author on the measure of dragon weights. Incredulity is likely the response of most of my readers to the figures which appear hereafter to describe the weight of the various dragon breeds, as being wholly disproportionate to those which have hitherto been reported. The estimate of 10 tons for a full-grown regal copper is commonly known, and such prodigious bulk must already strain the imagination. What then must the reader think when I report that this is a vast understatement and claim a figure closer to 30 tons, indeed reaching so high as 50 for the largest of this breed? For explanation, I must direct the reader to the recent work of M. Cuvier. In his latest, now remember, this is 1796, so for him to be referencing someone who sounds like a French last name, French scientist and the like, a French naturalist, whatever you want to call it, dragon expert, could be possible because they're not at war yet. These two nations are still collaborating. In his last anatomical studies of the air sacs, which, I don't know that to be entirely true, 1796, but it's not full-on Napoleonic war yet. We're still talking French Revolution. I think it was still a little dicey back then, but I think the scientists, the naturalists, those communities were probably still interacting. In his latest anatomical studies of air sacs which enable draconic flight, M. Cuvier has drawn in turn upon the work of Mr. Cavendish in a successful isolation of those particular gases, lighter than the general composition of the air, which fill the sacs, and has correspondingly proposed a new system of measurement, which was compensating for the weight displaced by the air sacs, provides a better degree of comparison between the weight of dragons and that of other large land animals lacking in these organs. Those who have never seen a dragon in the flesh, and most particularly never one of the very largest breeds in whom this discrepancy shall appear the most pronounced, may be skeptical. Apologies. Those who've had the opportunity, as I have, of seeing a regal copper side by side with the very largest of the Indian elephants, who have been measured at some 6 tons themselves, will, I hope, join me in greatly preferring a scheme of measurement which does not ridiculously suggest that the one, who could devour the other nearly in a bite, should weigh less than twice as much. Sir Edward Howe, December 1795. Chapter 5. This is, again, excerpts. Breeds native to the British Isles. Just a couple more pages now. I checked. Breeds native to the British Isles, common breeds, relation to continental breeds, the effect of modern diet upon size, heredity of the regal copper, venomous and vitriolic breeds. That's like the little table of contents here. It is as well to recollect that yellow reapers, so often unjustly regarded, and it's kind of put as like a caption. That's what I love it, the commitment to creating some reality, a historical reality. Part of this is there would, of course, be textbooks about these dragons if they've been around through all time and stuff like that. So here's, of course, there'd be an excerpt from this textbook. It is as well to recollect that yellow reapers, so often unjustly regarded that with that contempt engendered by familiarity, are to be found everywhere, because of their many excellent qualities, generally hardy and not fastidious in their diet, untroubled by all but the worst extremes of heat or cold, almost invariably good-humored in character. They have contributed to almost every bloodline in these isles. These dragons fall squarely into the middleweight range, though they range more widely within the breed than most, from a weight of some 10 tons to as many as 17 in a recent large specimen. Ordinarily, they fall between 12 and 15 tons, with a length generally of 50 feet, and a nicely proportioned wingspan of 80 feet. Malachite reapers are most easily distinguished from their more common cousins by coloration, while yellow reapers are mottled yellow, sometimes with white tiger striping along their sides and wings. Malachite reapers are a more muted yellow-brown with pale green markings. They are generally believed to be the result of unguided interbreeding between the Anglo-Saxon conquests. During the Anglo-Saxon conquests between yellow reapers and Scandinavian lindorms. Love again how that's Anglo-Saxon conquest is a historically accurate thing that happened, and now they're weaving how dragons have played in. Will there be Scandinavian or Norwegian dragons or something like that coming in with these invaders? Preferring cooler climes, they are generally to be found in northeastern Scotland. From hunting records and bone collections, we know that the grey widowmaker breed was once very nearly as common as the reapers, though they are now rarely to be found, this breed being so violently intractable and given to stealing domesticated cattle has been made nearly extinct through hunting, though some individuals may be found living wild even to this day in isolated mountainous regions, particularly in Scotland, and a few more have been coaxed into breeding grounds to preserve as basic stock. They are small and aggressive by nature, rarely exceeding 8 tons, and their coloration of mottled gray is ideal for concealment while flying, which inspired their crossbreeding with the more even-tempered Winchesters to produce the grayling breed. So that's cool as well, that they were smart enough at the time to say, even if this dragon is too wild for us to just take and breed a lot as a fighting dragon that can be friends with us and stuff like that, we could save a little bit of it, as stock and mix it in with other dragons and take some of the good parts of it for future generations. The most common French breeds, the Pêcheur Coronet and the Pêcheur Ré, are more closely related to the widowmaker breed than to the reapers, if we may judge by wing conformation and the structure of the breastbone, which in both breeds is keeled and fused with the clavicle. This anatomical peculiarity renders them both more useful for breeding down to light combat and courier breeds, rather than into heavy combat breeds. Crossbreeding with continental species is also the source of all the heavyweight breeds now to be found in Britain, none of which can be considered properly native to our shores. Most likely this is due to climate. Heavier dragons greatly prefer warm environs, where their air sacs can more easily compensate for their tremendous weight. It has been suggested that the British Isles cannot support herds vast enough to sustain the largest breeds. The flaws to this claim of reasoning may be shown by consideration of the very wide variations in diet to be tolerated among dragons insofar as quantity is concerned. In the wild, it is well known, dragons eat so infrequently as once every 2 weeks, particularly in summer when they prefer to sleep a great deal and their natural prey are at their fattest. It will then come as no surprise to learn that dragons in the wild do not begin to approach the sizes which can be found among their domesticated cousins, fed daily and more, particularly during the early years so critical to their growth. By way of example, we have only to consider the barren desert regions of Almeria in the southeast of Spain, scantily inhabited by goats, which are the native grounds of the fierce Caucador Real, part ancestor of the regal copper. In domestication, this breed reaches a fighting weight of some 25 tons, but in the wild is scarcely to be found over 10 or 12 tons. The regal copper exceeds in size all other breeds presently known, reaching in maturity as many as 50 tons in weight and 120 feet in length. They are dramatic in color, shading from red to yellow, with much variation between individuals. The male of the species is on the average slightly smaller than the female and develops forehead horns in maturity. Both sexes have a marked spiny column along the back, which renders them particularly hazardous targets for boarding operations. These great beasts are unquestionably the greatest triumph of the British breeding grounds, the product of some 10 generations' labor and careful crossbreeding, and illustrative of the unanticipated benefits which may be yielded by matings not perhaps of obvious value. It was Roger Bacon who first proposed the notion of breeding females of the smaller, bright copper species to the great conquistador, brought to England as part of the dowry of Eleanor of Castile. Now that's cool too, right? If there were dragons, these powerful beasts, they could be given away as dowries, as assets, similar to how like a big battleship or a piece of land or something like that might have been given away without dragons, like historically, truly in the past. Though his suggestions were founded in the erroneous supposition of the time, which thought color to be indicative of some elemental influence, and the shared orange color of the two breeds a sign of underlying congruence, the cross was a fruitful one, leading to offspring often larger than their prodigious sire, and often able to sustain flight over distance. Mr. Josiah Colloquin of Glasgow had suggested that the disproportionate size of the air sacs of the bright copper, relative to their frame, properly deserves the credit for this success, and it is certain that regal coppers share this trait of their female progenitors. M. Cuvier's anatomical studies suggest that, indeed, the vast bulk of the regal copper would crush the very breath out of the dragon's lungs, if unsupported by aught but their surprisingly delicate skeletal systems. While no pyrogenic species, those who breathe fire, are to be found in the British Isles, despite many attempts on the part of our breeders to introduce this most valuable trait, so deadly to our shipping in the persons of the French Flemme de Goire or the Spanish Flecha del Fuego, the native sharp-spitter breed is notable for producing a venom to incapacitate its prey. Though the sharp-spitter itself is too small and low-flying to be of great value as a fighting beast, crossbreeding with the French Horne d'Or for its size, and with the Russian ironwing, another venomous species, yielded several valuable crosses, better flyers, middleweight in size, with more potent venom. Interbreeding among these, with frequent infusions from the parent breeds, culminated in the successful hatching of the first dragon which could properly be termed a longwing, during the reign of Henry VII. In this breed, the venom had become so potent as to be properly termed acid, and of a strength which could be turned not only against other beasts, but against targets on the ground. The other truly vitriolic breeds known to us at present are the Kopakakti, an Incan breed, and the Karyu of Japan. Long wings are I hope they show up in other books, right? You hear about this great big world of dragons, and I think that's smart for the author to leave this as a tantalizing little tidbit at the end of this book, leading into the whole series here, because you're like, I hope they go around the world and fight some of these dragons, join these dragons, right? I want to run into some Incan dragons and stuff, some African dragons. Like, let's go. Long wings are unfortunately instantly identifiable upon the battlefield and impossible to decoy, due to the unusual proportions for which they are named. Though they rarely exceed 60 feet in length, wingspans of 120 feet are not uncommon among them. That's as long as they said the regal copper was. And their wing coloration is particularly dramatic, shading from blue to orange, with vivid black and white striations at the rims. They possess the same yellow-orange eyes as their progenitor, the sharpspitter, which are exceptionally good. Though the breed was first considered intractable, and indeed some consideration was given to their destruction as too dangerous to be left unharnessed, during the reign of Elizabeth I, new methods of harnessing were developed which secured the general domestication of the breed, and they were instrumental in the destruction of the Armada. So if you've been following here, we all know it's kind of a open secret that women are the preferred captains of the long wing breed in the story. So Elizabeth I, being a famous female monarch of England, she was probably open to that approach, whereas maybe in the past they were not. All right, this is the last little 2-page section here, chapter 17, which is an excerpt. Comparison of Oriental and Western breeds, antiquity of the Oriental breeds, known breeds native to the empires of China and Japan, distinguishing characteristics of the Imperial, a note on the Celestial. The secrets of the Imperial breeding program are most jealously guarded, as the national treasures which they assuredly are, and transmitted strictly through word of mouth among a trusted line, and through documents encoded by closely held ciphers. Very little is known in the West, and indeed anywhere outside of the precincts of the imperial capital, about these breeds. Brief observations by travelers have yielded only a handful of incomplete details. We know that the Imperial and Celestial are distinguished by the number of talons on their claws, which are 5, unlike virtually every other draconic breed, being 4-fingered. Similarly, their wings have 6 spines, rather than the 5 common to the European breeds. In the Orient, these breeds are popularly supposed to be highly superior in intelligence, retaining into adulthood that remarkable facility of memory and linguistic ability which dragons ordinarily lose early in life. So I don't think we've heard that part before. Kind of cool to know. For the veracity of this claim, we have but one recent witness, though a reliable one. M. the Comte de la Pérouse encountered an imperial dragon at the Korean court, who, through their close relations to the court of China, have been often granted the privilege of an imperial egg. The first Frenchman to attend at this court in recent memory, he was asked for lessons in his native tongue, and by his reports the dragon, though full grown, was well able to hold a conversation by the time of his departure, some 1 month later. An achievement hardly to be scorned. Oh my gosh, sorry, there's a bug in here. An achievement, man, I thought that thing was going to fly right at me. Hardly to be scorned by a gifted linguist. That the Celestial is closely related to the Imperial may be inferred from the few illustrations that we have in the West have managed to obtain of this breed, but very little else is known of them. The divine wind, that most mysterious of draconic abilities, is known to us only by hearsay, which would have us believe that the Celestials are able to produce earthquakes or storms capable of leveling a city. Plainly, the effects have been hardly exaggerated, but there is some considerable practical respect for the ability among the Oriental nations, which cautions against any rash dismissal of this gift as pure fantasy. So they're talking about that tsunami, that divine wind ability, sonic boom ability that Temeraire has, which is obviously proved by the end of the book. Wow, so we got to the end of it, folks. We got through the epilogue just now and the closing notes. from the dragon expert in the book. Thanks so much for reading with me. I'm debating actually going on with the series only because the second one is very much based in and around China. I'm not in love with attempting those accents accurately and stuff like that. The books are rather long and they're not often covered for academic value. And I'm still debating in the channel how much I'm just going to go down a fantasy realm for some of the books I'd like to read just kind of for fun. And versus books that I read growing up or were read to me in schools. Maybe there's a little bit of both. I could do kind of one of each, keep that going for a time. But I'd love your feedback and comments, how you thought I did about this book, the choice of this book, future books. Please give me your feedback. I started out recording these for posterity for my own children, just to be able to watch as they got older and stuff like that. But I really have fallen in love with being able to interact with other avid readers who love each of these stories that I've been reading. And I just want to hear what you think of it, if you appreciate it. All right. Thanks so much. Take care, and we'll hopefully see you on the next book.